The Marsh Stalkings. Written and performed by Tony Capobianco. Everyday obligations and routines sometimes become anything but ordinary. Seemingly ordinary people can be avatars of real evil, hidden in plain sight. Disguised as a neighbor, a family member, a teacher, a pastor, a churchgoer, or a customer, they prowl about like a lion, looking for someone to devour. Just like a lion, this kind of predator uses its environment to conceal itself from its prey items. Calling other people prey items sounds dehumanizing, because that's exactly what it is. Someone who hunts other humans doesn't see anyone else as an equal. No, he sees all others as an object to be used, consumed, or destroyed. Lydia worked at a sunglass store at the local mall. The mall was near campus. She was 19 years old at the time. Working while going to college was difficult. Difficulties weren't something that had ever stopped her before, and she was determined that they wouldn't stop her then. Taking a full-time course load at the university and working 30 hours a week meant that her plate was full. Selling sunglasses at the mall might not sound like a challenging job, but there's more to it than meets the eye. Mall jobs in small stores are often lonely and mind-numbingly boring. Lydia routinely worked the store solo. She had no co-workers to talk to during most of her shifts. If the mall was busy and she had plenty of customers, then, although it was exhausting, time would pass relatively quickly. When mall traffic was low and business was slow, it was often a Herculean feat to get through the shift without losing her sanity. For a while, Lydia used the downtime to do schoolwork and to study. She had even jokingly told her friends that her job paid her to do her class assignments. She had wondered if she would have lost her mind at the job if she hadn't had college work to keep her busy. Working the store all alone made it feel like she was in a lonely fortress of solitude. The isolation was challenging, but she put her head down and persevered so that she could earn a bachelor's degree in sociology. She hoped to be the first person in her family to graduate from college. The odds of her achieving her goals weren't in her favor. Her mom was an alcoholic, and her father suffered from depression. Screaming matches between her parents had been common in their home. While her mom and dad never physically struck each other, their cruel, heartless words toward each other cut much deeper than a knife. The hatred in the tone of their words permeated the atmosphere with a thick, suffocating shroud of evil. Never knowing when the next verbal fight was going to erupt like a volcano of verbal and psychological violence, Lydia was always anxious. She was on edge at all times. Though she desired fleeing that toxic environment to build a better future, the deck was stacked against her. College was expensive, and though she was an excellent student, she hadn't been awarded any scholarships to help pay for the expense. Taking a full load of classes while working at the sunglass store became her reality. She had to work in order to put herself through school. In addition to being dysfunctional, her family wasn't wealthy. Though her parents loved her, they were unable to provide her with the monetary support that she needed to achieve her dream. Her parents were too broken to even provide her with the healthy, stable, and loving home that every child would be entitled to in a more just and perfect world. The real world was far from just and loving. Young and idealistic, Lydia wanted to change that. She wanted to make the world more just and compassionate. Those were the reasons that Lydia endured her job at the mall. The job truly was tedious, and it took tremendous willpower to sit there for hours while her friends partied. The frequent boredom and isolation weren't the worst part of her job. Sometimes, strange individuals would wander into the store and linger around. Whereas the typical visit into the shop might last 2 to 5 minutes, the lingering type stuck around for 15 to 30 minutes. When the lingering types were teenage boys or men, things got awkward. The lone wolf creepers often flirted with Lydia. She hated the feeling that she got when she caught them staring at her. She knew that they were undressing her with their eyes. As dirty as such encounters made her feel, what was worse was the realization that she was all alone. If someone took the awkwardness to a dangerous level, she was on her own. If someone crossed the line, threatened her, or assaulted her, she could have screamed or called mall security, but she knew that those options certainly didn't guarantee her safety. If a cunning attacker planned an assault, they could have easily gotten her into the back room behind the sales floor. If a predator had gotten her into the back room, she would have been in serious trouble. An assailant could have sexually assaulted her, beat her, or worse. Being a highly attractive young woman, Lydia had always been aware of the potential dangers that came with being a pretty girl. Far from flattering her, every catcall and unwanted advance made her feel uneasy and put her on alert. One man, he looked like he was around 25 years old, frequently came into the store when Lydia was working by herself. He had blonde hair and intense blue eyes. The look in his eyes made Lydia uncomfortable. His name was Ted, and he would hang around the store while desperately trying to keep the small talk going. He was socially awkward. His attempts at flirtation were a disaster, and his dirty jokes were so bad that they blew up before he finished the punchline. Lydia put up with Ted and every other testosterone-fueled boy that came into the store. She had chalked up the flirtations and sexual awkwardness to boys being boys. At least that was the case until something changed. On several occasions, she had sensed that someone had been following her to her car after she had gotten off of work. She hadn't been able to confirm that the person was following her, nor could she describe what he looked like. The man always lurked behind her like a sinister shadow in the distance. A queasy feeling slowly rose within her gut until it became a sickening storm. The general sense of alarm, along with the queasiness, was something that she had rationalized away. Studying sociology had equipped her with the tools that enabled her to sweep away her concerns. She had told herself that gut feelings weren't facts. She refused to allow superstitions to scare her or make her paranoid. As reassuring as these tactics had been, they only worked for a short time. Things that could be dismissed quickly turned into things that were undeniable threats. One day, after helping a customer look at an expensive pair of sunglasses that were locked up in a glass case, Lydia then returned to the register. She saw a note attached to the computer screen. The note read, "Hi, Blue Eyes. I've been watching you. I see that you're all alone. That's such a pity. But don't worry. You won't be alone for much longer. I'll fix that. You are mine. I'll be seeing you soon." Every hair on her body rose up as if they wanted to run. Her blood ran cold, her jaw dropped, and her eyes became dilated. Fear was in full force. Similar disturbing notes were found over the coming weeks. The notes grew more threatening and had become sexually explicit. Both mall security and the police had been informed of these threatening notes, but there wasn't much that they could do, or perhaps there wasn't much that they were willing to do. The police said that since no crime had been committed, that there wasn't a lot for them to do. Additionally, because Lydia didn't know who the culprit was, there wasn't anyone for the police to interview. A policeman explained to her that most cases like this didn't escalate to violence, and that most of the time, letters like this are either pranks or fantasies. They did tell her that they would send an officer to walk through the mall every now and then. Mall security assured her that they would keep a close eye on her store. As the weeks went by, the threatening letters became more detailed and intimate. The stalker left a note under Lydia's dorm room door that said, "Hey, sexy blue eyes. I really enjoyed your psychology class today. 9:15 a.m. is a bit early for my taste, but seeing you made it all worth it. That low-cut orange blouse that you wore really made me hot. You shouldn't tease the other guys like that. It would make me jealous. Will I come for you at work? Or will it be as you're walking home from class? Or maybe you'll be naked in the shower when you see me. Maybe it'll be right when the shampoo covers your pretty little blue eyes. See you soon." The stalking had escalated and Lydia was terrified. She had become convinced that her stalker was going to violently assault her soon. This clearly wasn't the product of some teenage prank. The stalking wasn't confined to her job at the mall. This sick degenerate was stalking her at school, and he knew where she lived. He had gotten into her dorm room, and she knew that she wasn't safe anywhere anymore. Who was her shadowy stalker? Was it creepy Ted? Was it a customer? Was it a boy from campus? Lydia didn't know. She did know that she had to do something. She wasn't going to be a passive observer turned helpless victim. While the police had told her that there were no fingerprints left behind on the letters, she believed that there had to be some clues somewhere. The idea that this was the stalker's first time at this seemed absurd to her. No, he had likely done this multiple times to multiple women already. The fact that the police, mall, and campus security were keeping their eyes out just wasn't enough. This predator wasn't going to be taken down by half-hearted, sporadic patrols. Searching the internet had yielded interesting results. Through the marvel that was her web browser, Lydia learned that there had been a string of similar incidents in California. Local news articles from Southern California spoke of a robber who targeted young mall employees. A few months later, in Northern California, local articles reported on a series of violent store robberies that had ended in sexual assault. Not only that, but in each case, the killer had chosen a girl that was alone at work. Then, an article from a few months later said that a store robbery had gone bad and ended in sexual assault and murder. The police had apparently come to that conclusion because the robber had used objects of convenience to commit the killing. The police reasoned that if it had been a premeditated killing, then the murderer likely would have brought his own knife or a gun. Lydia read of similar reports across California. Lydia saw a pattern there. She believed that the California Police Department initially failed to connect the cases because the crimes had been strung out in different counties, often many miles apart. The police tend to be very hesitant to attribute murders to a serial killer. That hesitation or cautiousness is understandable. Serial killer cases often cost a tremendous amount of time and manpower in order to reach a resolution. Beyond that, serial killings usually create a media frenzy and fear within the community. Further research showed that the California Police Department eventually did make the connection. The killer eventually broadened his horizons. He began stalking attractive girls at the mall. He'd leave them threatening notes for several months, and then he would assault and murder them. Sometimes he would assault them in their cars, sometimes he'd assault them in their homes, and sometimes he would kill them in their stores. Strangulation had become his preferred method of committing murder. Once the media got hold of the news, they dubbed this monster killer the Mall Death Stalker. Goosebumps rose as a cold chill spread from Lydia's shoulders down her back. If the Mall Death Stalker was the psychopath that was stalking her, then things were worse than she had suspected. It's one thing to suspect that the person stalking you is going to attack you, but it's another thing to suspect that he's a notorious serial killer. The latter would have a lot of experience, and that deadly experience ratchets up the fear and foreboding. The Pennsylvania police weren't at all persuaded by Lydia's hypothesis. They thanked her for bringing the information to their attention, but they didn't see any tangible proof that the Mall Death Stalker was her stalker. They didn't see any reason to conclude that the notorious serial killer had left California and come to Pennsylvania. They combed through state police reports, and there weren't any murders that matched his M.O. Frustrated, Lydia took immediate precautions. She purchased pepper spray and a sizable dagger. Both were to remain in her purse at all times. She was convinced that the Mall Death Stalker was stalking her and that he would strike soon. She was, at the very least, going to put up one hell of a fight. Interestingly, she had grown tired of the uncertainty and wondering if or when the attack would come. Though fear was present with her on a daily basis since the threatening letters began, it was a healthy fear. Tired of perpetually being on edge, she wanted to get it over with. The anxiousness had become so acute that ordinary things triggered her fight or flight response. The sound of a refrigerator turning on, or spotting a bird fly by from the corner of her eye, released a shot of adrenaline throughout her body. The constant release of these stress chemicals exhausted her. She suspected that her stalker wanted to produce these reactions. She had come to believe that he relished in toying with his victims and that he delighted in driving them crazy. As a psychopath, he was a puppet master that got off on pulling a girl's strings before cutting them. Whatever the case may have been, she was done waiting. On a Tuesday night, working the closing shift at the sunglass store, her waiting came to an end. As Lydia was focused on counting the money in the register, from the corner of her eye, she saw the gate to the store close. A man around 6 feet tall stood silently staring at her. He was wearing a black hooded sweatshirt, and the hood was up. He locked the gate. Lydia screamed, but no one could hear her. A neighboring store was blasting music as they cleaned their store. The stalker smirked a sinister smirk. Lydia ran to the back room. The stalker followed. As she grabbed her purse, the stalker threw her to the floor with great violence. With a death grip, her right hand clung to the purse. The stalker slapped her face with the back of his hand. Her nose began to bleed. The stalker's eyes were ice cold and wild. They were the eyes of a shark. As she looked into his eyes, she looked into an abyss. It was as if nothing was behind his eyes. The nothingness conveyed a great and terrible evil. The sinister stalker continued to straddle her as he began to touch her over her clothes. He breathed heavily and said, "Hello, Blue Eyes. I've been waiting so long for this moment." As Lydia pulled the can of pepper spray out of her purse, she said, "So have I." Lydia quickly pointed the can at his face and sprayed him full force. The spray covered his eyes. The burning sensation made the attacker angry. He swung blindly, but he managed to punch her in her face. He hit her once, then twice. The metallic taste of blood trickled down Lydia's throat. It was do or die time. Instead of shutting down in shock, the taste of her own blood had made her more determined. The adrenaline not only prevented her from feeling the pain caused by the beating, but it enabled her to focus. She had the focus of an athlete in the zone. She had tunnel vision, and she saw precisely what she must do. She slid her hand back into her purse, and she took out a dagger. She took the dagger and slashed his face. The knife left a long, deep gash across the left side of his face. Then she thrust her sharp dagger into the chest of her attacker. He leaned away from her and collapsed to the floor. Grabbing her phone from her pocket, she called 911. Minutes later, paramedics arrived along with the police. Both the stalker and the would-be victim were transported to the hospital. Lydia was banged up, but she made a full recovery. Her assailant, however, remained in critical condition for a week. His condition eventually stabilized and he stood trial. He stood trial twice, once in Pennsylvania and once in California. Her stalker was indeed found guilty of being the Mall Death Stalker. The Mall Death Stalker's real name was Dylan Rottenborn. The people who knew him were shocked that he was the infamous serial killer. He looked ordinary. He had friends and even a pretty fiancée. No one imagined that Rottenborn was living a double life. He was the district manager of a clothing store that had locations in numerous malls. His job gave him the opportunity to prowl numerous malls for potential victims. The 32-year-old district manager hid in plain sight as he stalked innocent young women. The ordeal changed Lydia's life. She continued to study sociology, but she added a second major in criminology. She then got her master's in criminology. With the same dogged determination that helped her discover, survive, and then take down the Mall Death Stalker, she pursued a career in the FBI. The FBI accepted her application, and she quickly ascended to the top of her class at the FBI Academy in Quantico. She became Special Agent Lydia Marsh. Her exceptional skills earned her a place at Moon Mist Division. The Mall Death Stalker inadvertently created one of the best FBI agents that the Bureau has known. The traumatizing, life-changing events weighed heavily on Lydia's mind as she replayed them over and over again. The news that Dylan Rottenborn, the Mall Death Stalker, had been broken out of jail shook her to the core. Had the master broken him out of prison? She wasn't sure, but she strongly suspected that he at least had something to do with it. After the way the master had used her ex-boyfriend, or rather, the body of her ex-boyfriend to attack her, she knew that all bets were off. Any and every conceivable attack was possible. While Rottenborn was a manipulative psychopath, the master was the supreme manipulator. Dealing with a human monster was one thing, but dealing with a powerful, authentic, undead monster was something else entirely. The master was hunting her and her team. Now, the acute anxiousness that she once felt when she had been stalked in college had returned. Despite all of her training, she was on edge. Once again, the slightest unexpected movement or noise released her stress responses. Adrenaline kicked in frequently and without normal cause. Now that her old stalker was on the loose, her anxiety would be heightened even more. She had no doubt that the Mall Death Stalker would try to track her down. She wondered if the master had turned him. If he had become a vampire, then he would be even more deadly. If her old foe did show up again, things would be different this time. Unlike her first battle with the MALL Death Stalker, she wasn't on her own anymore. No longer was she a vulnerable young college girl. Now, she was a member of an elite, secret FBI division that hunted literal supernatural monsters. The Moon Mist team was her family. Her best friend happened to be a descendant of a legendary ancient order born with powerful psychic abilities. Though Agent Castabello had recently been roughed up and filled with doubt, she took comfort in knowing that he was her partner. She was going to need him. I hope that you enjoyed your stay here at the Haunted Half Moon Inn. The Master requests that you consider supporting me and the inn by becoming a slave. A patron of mine on Patreon. The Half Moon Inn needs your support to keep the doors open. You wouldn't want the residents here to feel forgotten and abandoned, would you? Creating quality scary stories to share with you is very important to me. Running this inn of horror is a passion of mine, and I would truly appreciate your support. The world is hurting. It needs more horror. Help me to heal the world through horror. Together, with your help, we could haunt this world one home at a time. Until next time, always remember, just because you don't see them doesn't mean that they aren't there.